It's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis. This is Red Eye Radio.
Phone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis in for Gary and Eric. Ended the last hour with this audio that I feel so passionately about. Where last night, of course, you know, we're talking about the interview with Kamala Harris and Bret Baier. And they're talking about the Americans, the women that were killed by illegal aliens that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, allowed into our country. And Baier asked the question, and I think it's a good question, do you owe the families of these women that were killed by illegal aliens that were allowed into our country by your administration, do you owe those families an apology? I played just a small part of the clip at the end of the last hour. I want to go ahead and play the entire clip now, because I think it offers more context as to how absolutely oblivious and tone-deaf Kamala Harris is.
It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Brett.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I'm so sorry for her loss. Sincerely.
She sounds so sincere, doesn't she? And so as I said earlier in the program, I'm sorry for your loss is not an apology. That's like saying to somebody, I'm sorry that you're upset. You're not apologizing for, you know, the reason why you made them upset. You're just, I'm sorry that you're upset. Kamala Harris owes those mothers an apology for allowing those murderers into the country unvetted. These are bad guys, and some of them had criminal records already. Maybe all of them. But the callous nature of I'm sorry for their loss is just, it's heartless. It is absolutely heartless. And so Bret Baier, he also goes into, again, the discussion about the Border Patrol and how they did support that border bill that she's talking about, but they always conveniently leave out the fact that the Border Patrol has now supported Donald Trump.
They need more resources, and Congress ultimately is the only place that's going to get fixed, Brett.
Well,
that's how this system works.
That's the premise of this question.
But
there were
that's how the
90-plus
system works.
executive orders that were rescinded in the first days. Many of those were Trump border policies. I'm not going to stay here because there's other things to talk about, but you frequently talk to the Border Patrol Union for support of that bipartisan bill, and they did. They supported it. But they also just endorsed Donald Trump and said, you've been, quote, a failure with border security. Why do you think they said that?
I think they're frustrated, and I get it. They want support. They want support, and that's what that border security bill would have done. These guys down at the border, these men and women, they're working hard. They're working around the clock. I get it.
Yeah, they're ticked. They're angry because their job, basically under Biden and Harris, has turned into babysitters for illegal aliens. It's all about catch and release. And so just so you know where I stand, if you're looking for some analysis, I will tell you that Kamala Harris was not ready for this interview. Kamala Harris was not ready for some of the questions that she got. And Bret Baier, I think, did an outstanding job of following up, asking follow-up questions, doing what he could to try and get some answers out of her and sort of wade through all of her damn talking points and try and get to some real opinions and some sort of defense of her policies. But her policies and the policies of Joe Biden, they're indefensible. You can't defend them. And so she did everything that she could not to answer the questions, and the entire interview was full of obfuscation, and she didn't answer any questions. And so the entire night, I'm sitting here playing all of this audio and some other stories as well, but I'm playing all of this audio, but nowhere in this audio is any answers to the questions that Bret Baier asked. And so ultimately, the answer is she has no answers. I don't believe that she understands what you and I and the American people are going through. Bret Baier also asked Kamala Harris if America feels like the country is going in the wrong direction, which it is. Doesn't that mean that the American people, feel like she and Biden, of course, they're the reason why our country is going in the wrong direction? And one of the things that she did all night was she really tried to skate away from any sort of acknowledgement that this administration is not popular with the American people.
Madam Vice President, more than 70% of people
that is
tell
about
pollsters,
turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But
people
you're the
have
lever of
become.
power.
But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president, one, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable,
wow,
that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted.
You know, when she keeps saying people are exhausted, you know what I'm seeing? I'm not seeing that people are exhausted. You know what's going on across the country, right? I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and yesterday was the first day of early voting. I didn't see a lot of people that were exhausted. I saw a lot of people that were fired up to go vote. I don't know this for a fact. I haven't seen the headlines here in Tennessee yet, but I would be willing to bet that yesterday we had a record first day of voting, early voting turnout. I'd be willing to bet that we set records. Where I voted in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, I waited an hour. And you had people that were laughing. You had people that were carrying on. You had people that were excited to come out and early vote. You know why? Not because they're exhausted. It's because they're fired up. They're ticked off. Because they've been hearing the same lies. They've been hearing the same obfuscations of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden for the last 3.5 years. Crime, illegal immigration, trying to keep up with the cost of groceries, the billions that we're sending to Ukraine, crime going up. People, you know what? Here's the deal. People have been dealing with all of this stuff. And if they're exhausted because of all of the things that I just mentioned. Now, here's another one. Did Donald Trump actually say that he would turn the military on the American people, because this is a claim that Kamala Harris made.
And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy.
This is a democracy. You're lying. Kamala Harris is lying. Donald Trump said that he wanted to utilize the National Guard to stop the George Floyd riots as cities were burning to the ground. That's what he said. And so for the Democrats to say, oh, he threatened to turn the military loose on the American people. Well, the American people that we're all referring to in the proper context is people that were burning down police stations and people that were robbing and looting stores and setting police stations and police cars on fire. That's what he was talking about. Again, put in the proper context.
And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
Now, is Donald Trump threatened to lock people up for disagreeing with him? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I've not seen that. And if he did say that, well, then I would disagree with that. But I don't know if I've seen Donald Trump say that. The problem that I think society right now has is that there have been so many things. I say on my local show in Nashville, Tennessee, on WTN, I say this all the time, which is I could spend my entire 4-hour morning show debunking the things that Kamala Harris and the Democrats and the mainstream media continuously say about Donald Trump, the constant lies and obfuscations and the exaggerations that they tell about Donald Trump. So that's the question. Can you believe anything that she says? Because you know that she tells a lot of lies.
And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah, Mark Milley. Mark Milley. And here's the thing about Mark Milley, because Mark Milley, he came out, there's a book from Bob Woodward, and apparently Milley says in this book by Bob Woodward, which, by the way, this book surprises no one, because you've got a couple of people that are never Trumpers. And so supposedly Milley, as reported by Bob Woodward, says that Donald Trump is a fascist and he's unfit to serve. Now, here's the deal. Mark Milley, he is very pro giving all this money, unlimited money, to Ukraine. Talk about the Chinese spy balloon fiasco, the Afghanistan withdrawal. He was involved in all of those things. And so for Mark Milley to accuse Donald Trump of wanting to use the military against American citizens, I think that all of this is just silly. Because I'm here to tell you that any president, including Joe Biden and especially Kamala Harris, you can have a lot of people that are angry with the president, the vice president, whoever they may be. You name the administration. People get fired. People have differences of opinion. That's why Mark Milley is trying right now to throw Donald Trump under the bus. That's what it's all about. And there's a reason why Donald Trump is so viciously attacked by the people that he used to work with. It's because he refuses to play the game that folks play in Washington, D.C., where if you have a difference of opinion, you just allow the person to resign. Donald Trump, he went out and he said some very unkind things about Mark Milley because Mark Milley was saying unkind things about Donald Trump. But you hear all of these stories about how, you know, Mark Milley and others will say that Donald Trump is unfit to serve and he's a fascist. Really? Because it seems to me like the 4 years that Donald Trump was in office, we had lower prices. We did not have rampant illegal immigration and murderers coming across our southern border. We didn't have innocent Americans being killed by illegal aliens nearly at the rate that we now have with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We were not involved in these seemingly now forever wars, which right now we're dealing especially with Ukraine and Russia. We didn't have to deal with these things. So it seems to me like Donald Trump is fit to serve. And as far as this ongoing accusation that Donald Trump is some sort of a fascist, please tell me how he acted like a fascist in his first term. He didn't. This is just a cheap talking point that the Democrats continuously use because they have nothing else. 866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis in for Gary and Eric. This is Red Eye Radio.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by Howes Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
Unusually warm weather so far in the West. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
We have seen record-setting runs of triple-digit heat extending all the way into mid-October across the desert Southwest.
However,
we are looking, though, to the Pacific for some signs of significant change coming later this week. There is a cold front starting to push its way ashore across the Pacific Northwest, and that is the leading edge of what will be a sharply colder air mass working its way into the western United States later this week.
Meaning below normal temperatures in the West by this weekend, and a push of warmer temperatures throughout the eastern two-thirds of the nation.
So if you don't like the temperature this week where you're at, just wait a few days. It's going to flip. And in terms of precipitation, still pretty much wide open dry weather across the country. But that, too, is going to change at least for the western half of the country.
With a surge of moisture expected to bring 1 to 2 inch rain totals and the potential of the season's first snowfall. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE, and that is where we find, is this Lamarty in Los Angeles, or are you Marty?
Yeah, Lamarty. Mud is good enough. Most
okay, man.
And you're doing a fine job, and enjoy listening to you. Bear with me. I'm a little tired. I just finished my 12-hour shift, and but I just had to call you about this abomination of early voting that you're touting.
Okay.
I just I can only speak from how things used to be in California. I don't know about other states, but up until 2019, we very seldom ever had problems with results and such like that. But for say like military who out of overseas or people who knew they couldn't vote, we had absentee ballots. You could apply for an absentee ballot; it would be sent to you, and you had to have it back in the mail before Election Day. And then those ballots would be set aside, and they'd be held until after the voting took place. And 9 times out of 10, results were in by the 11 o'clock news at night. And if it was a really close race, it would be maybe usually results.
Well, let me ask you this: did you vote early, and did you have problems?
Well, I've never voted early. I've always I've never done an absentee ballot. But now in California, the governor's effectively, in the way I look at it, has taken away my vote by mailing out ballots to everybody.
Yeah.
And so, if they steal your ballot, then they can vote it and mail it, vote the way they want to, and send it in. But now, of course, California has early voting too.
Yeah, well, I got to run, unfortunately, but I will tell you this: that there are some places, there are some states like California. Unfortunately, man, they're just too far gone.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
Apparently, the delicate sensibilities of Democrats have been triggered. This is an interesting headline. This is from the Daily Mail. Social media explodes after Kamala Harris' total train wreck interview as supporters blast Fox News' Bret Baier for ambush. How was that an ambush interview? This is going to be one of those moments where if you're a Kamala Harris supporter, then you think that was an ambush interview. If you are a Trump supporter, then you think that Bret Baier did a great job. I think that's where we are going to land. If you are, I tend to be, just so you folks know, I only fill in, but I tend to be right down the middle when it comes to my analysis, if you will. So clearly I'm conservative. Clearly I'm a Donald Trump supporter. But clearly there are times when I'll call out my own side. I mean, I'm not averse to that. If I feel like my side has done something wrong, then I go after them. But see, in this case, if you're somebody who is accusing Bret Baier of an ambush interview, she knew that she was going into an interview, believe it or not, with an actual journalist. That is what Bret Baier is. He is an actual journalist. And so when you go into an interview with Bret Baier, an actual journalist, as opposed to, the narrative peddlers that she usually goes in for interviews with, you know that he's going to ask actual questions. So I think that there's a lot of people, on the left, they're very delicate, on the left. They're very delicate. They don't like to have their sensibilities offended by having to answer actual questions about policy. There's some audio I want to play. Let me see if I can find it real quick. This is MSNBC. This is a news story making the rounds on social media. MSNBC wades into early voting, and I thought this was interesting because as part of this whole conversation, they talk about, and I believe this was in Arizona, they actually talk about how they couldn't find anybody. They couldn't find anyone who was actually voting for Kamala Harris.
And should note, we did not find a single person who audibly would tell us that they voted for Kamala Harris. These were Trump supporters getting out to vote early in the all-important Mojave County. Take a listen to some of our conversations.
Well, the difference is going to be that everybody's coming out early, and everybody that we talk to has made a special effort this year to vote, and you can see it here in the parking lot. This library's usually got 5 cars in it. There's a ton of cars in it now.
Now, what did I say? When Kamala Harris, one of her favorite lines is, "Oh, everybody's just so exhausted." They're not exhausted. They're ticked off and they're fired up, including all of these folks out there in Mojave County in, I guess that's Arizona. They're fired up. They're fired up because the last 3.5 years have been a train wreck, in addition to Kamala Harris's interview last night with Bret Baier, also a train wreck.
Did you voted early for the first time?
For the first time.
Why did you vote early this year?
Honestly, because Donald Trump told me to.
What a good answer.
He keeps saying it, and I've been thinking about it, and so here I am.
Yeah, and you look at a lot of the polling, as you know, if you've been listening to Red Eye this week as I fill in for the guys, there's poll after poll after poll that will show you that Donald Trump has all the momentum, even in the battleground states. So Harris is losing momentum. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how she fares in the polling after this interview with Bret Baier last night, if it will actually have any impact on the polling. Not that the polling really matters at all, but because the only poll that matters is really on November 5th. Of course, we are in early voting as well. But Brian Stelter, You know, he's back, right? The old egghead himself, Brian Stelter. He's back on CNN as an analyst. And he had what I thought is a rather unique take on this whole thing.
I think this strategy from Harris was a Google strategy. She wanted Fox viewers to start to Google some of the things she was saying, because some of the comments she was making in this interview are foreign to the Fox audience. For example, General Mark Milley saying Trump is a fascist to the core. That's barely been covered on Fox News.
How can I ask this question? How does he know that's been barely covered on Fox News? Because I'm telling you that I watch Fox News, and that has been covered. But the difference, here's the difference I would say to egghead Brian Stelter. What I would say is that Fox News covers it in a slightly different way. Like if it's CNN, if it's MSNBC, if it's your typical, water-carrying media outlet carrying water for Kamala Harris and the Democrats, they will say, oh, yeah, Donald Trump, he's a fascist. He's like Adolf Hitler, so on and so forth. On Fox News, they'll cover it in a different way. They'll say, no, Donald Trump's not a fascist. And as I have said 1,000 times now, when you call Donald Trump a fascist, when you compare him to Hitler like all of these morons do, then what you're actually doing is you're sanitizing the very, very incredibly evil and murderous actions of Adolf Hitler, which means that you're anti-Semitic. And so Brian Stelter, I think that he could not be more wrong in his analysis of this interview.
So she was able to get some of those talking points in. This was the most adversarial interview Kamala Harris has probably ever done. Instead of getting to debate Trump again, she got to debate Bret Baier. And a lot of viewers are going to come away saying, wow, she's willing to do that. That's a sign of toughness and strength.
Right. Yeah, that's what it is. By the way, one of the things that I would also say where, you've got Brian Stelter and he's saying that people will Google what Mark Milley had to say about Donald Trump being a fascist. I think that is such an old and tired talking point now from people on the left talking about Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters. Part of the dynamic here is that this is such a common talking point that it doesn't really make an impact anymore. It doesn't land because we've all heard it. And those of us who have a lick of sense understand that is a vacant talking point. And so the reason why it probably didn't get as much coverage on Fox News, I don't know, is because we're just so used to it that it's not really news, to be honest with you. Oh, look, another person calling Donald Trump a fascist. Let's get the breaking news sounder out and have a 5 or 6 panel discussion about it. No, we don't. Donald Trump supporters don't care. One of my favorite parts of the interview last night was when Kamala Harris was asked about Joe Biden's decline.
He's misguided. You say now
he's
unstable.
He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this.
And by the way, they're talking about Donald Trump there. Kamala Harris has said all of these things about Donald Trump. And so Bret Baier is setting her up to ask the question about Joe Biden. And when did you know that Joe Biden was having cognitive issues?
He's misguided. You say now
he's unstable. He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
but
is.
You talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
You know what's interesting about that is that, first of all, you notice that she got a little persnickety where she's like, Brett, Donald Trump's on the ballot. Joe Biden's not on the ballot. It's not about Donald Trump. It's not about Joe Biden. It's about Kamala Harris. Because this is about judgment, character, and truth. Because for the last couple of years, we have all noticed, it has been painfully obvious, as we all watched Joe Biden's decline. And so for the last couple of years, Kamala Harris has denied that Joe Biden is in cognitive decline, even though we all saw it. So either the story has to be about Kamala Harris's judgment or her character. If she didn't notice, if she truly didn't notice the decline of Joe Biden, then her judgment and her ability to assess situations needs to be seriously questioned. If she didn't see what literally the entire world saw. That's number one. Number two, if you're going to sit here and tell us that, Biden is okay, but you're lying, well, then it's about character and truth. Because we can all see what is going on with Joe Biden. And I think that you know it too. You're intentionally lying to the American people. I don't believe that Kamala Harris, I don't think she's like the smartest person ever, but I also don't believe that she's, catatonically stupid. And you would have to be catatonically stupid to not see that Joe Biden is impaired. And so it's clear and it's obvious that she's lying. And so that goes right back to character and truth. She has no character because she is lying to the American people. Now, I know what a lot of you folks are thinking. Oh, wow, really, Mandis? You're going to, get all pearl clutchy about a politician that's lying? I understand that. But this isn't like your typical political lie where somebody will say, oh, yeah, my bill will save, $4 billion over the next 5 years. And then somebody else comes along with their own analysis and says something completely different. And then who's lying and who's telling the truth? This was a lie where the American people could see in real time that Joe Biden had been impacted by some sort of cognitive decline, and the Biden administration and Kamala Harris, they were lying to us. We were looking at it with our own eyes. But they told us everything was fine. So I think that she lacks the character, and I think that she lacks the ability to tell the truth, and that's why I believe that she, among many other things, does not deserve our votes to be president of the United States. I just don't. But the question and the questioning continued.
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community, have all spoken out, even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit.
So they're sitting here talking about how Donald Trump is unfit. See, that's the crazy thing, is that we had 4 years of Donald Trump. He's out on the campaign trail. Everything seems to be fine. So she refuses to talk about Joe Biden and his mental unfitness for the office. And she says, oh, the American people are concerned about Donald Trump. No, they're not. They're not concerned about Donald Trump. Some may be. If you are an absolute, diehard leftist, then yeah, you'll go ahead and you'll go with that talking point that Donald Trump is not fit for office. Oh, yeah, and of course, he's a fascist as well. But none of these are going to land. All of this is just what I would say talking points that she continues to throw down. And the more that she uses those talking points, the less credibility she has. 866-90-RED-EYE. Dan Mandis in for Gary and Eric. This is Red Eye Radio.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number. My name is Dan Mandis, in for Gary and Eric this week. You can follow me on X at Dan Mandis Show, where Grace sends me a tweet saying the biggest question is Kamala Harris strong enough to be the leader of our country, someone who has to deal with our adversaries? The interview with Brett Baer, she says, proves that Kamala Harris is not strong enough, is not ready to deal with our adversaries. And you can also send me your own missives. Follow me on X at Dan Mandis Show. I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. You can find our apps and listen online pretty much everywhere, including Facebook and Twitter, as well as YouTube. We'll see you tomorrow.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.